Good evening. It's great to have you all here tonight. My name is Sean Hill, and I'm the director of the Minnesota Northwoods Writers Conference. Welcome to our Evening Reading Series. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones. All right. So it's Friday somehow. This evening we're about to hear the fifth of our 6 readers this week, Benjamin Percy. And I can't believe we only have one more readings. I think it's been a good week. I've had a good time hanging out with Ben this week. The last time I saw him was a few years ago. He was a visiting writer at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. I'm really glad that he accepted the invitation to teach here this week. It's going to be my great pleasure to introduce him, but before I do that, I need to express some gratitude. This conference is supported in part by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Minnesota State Farms Board, thanks to legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. So thank you, Minnesotans. We are grateful to be back in our home in the Northwoods at the Minnesota State University beside the lake known as the Michigawag, where the river crosses, which has been a sacred gathering place for countless generations of indigenous peoples, including Dakota, Lakota, and Anishinaabe, who remain the spiritual caretakers and thriving members of the greater community to which we all belong. Situated as we are between 3 Ojibwe reservations, Leech Lake, White Earth, and Red Lake. We recognize and support the sovereignty of Native nations. We will continue to work with Indigenous teachers, elders, and youth to protect and honor all our relationships with the land, and all our relatives and the truth. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's reader, Benjamin Percy. Benjamin Percy is the author of 6 novels, including most recently The Unfamiliar Garden, the second in the Comet Cycle trilogy. Ben has also published 3 collections of stories and a book of essays, Thrill Me, essays nonfiction. He co-wrote the film Summering, which with the director James Ponsoldt, and it premiered at Sundance this past January and will be released widely this summer. Ben writes Wolverine, X-Force, and Ghost Rider for Marvel. His fiction and nonfiction has been published in periodicals such as Esquire, GQ, and the Paris Review. His honors include the Whiting Award and NEA Fellowship, the Plimpton Prize, 2 Pushcart Prizes, and inclusion in Best American Short Stories and Best American Comics. Stephen King, yes, that's Stephen King, tweeted about the first novel of the Comet series, The Ninth Metal, saying, "The Ninth Metal by Benjamin Percy, debris from a comet drops a fabulously valuable new metal in North Fall, Minnesota, turning it into a bloody, brawling boomtown. Great characters, fine writing, totally engrossing." So, get ready to be engrossed. Please welcome
Yo, how's everybody doing? The other night when Kimberly was reading and the tornado warning went off, I was saying how we really could have messed with the Zoomers out there. You know, started shaking this camera, screaming. The weather might turn ugly again tonight, so I got some tricks up my sleeve. Any alarms go off. On a more serious note, we live in upsetting times. This has been an upsetting day. This has been an upsetting day. But this has been an inspiring week, and I keep coming back to Doug's demand that we distress and provoke through our art. And that is a call to action right there. You're good at noise. You believe in noise, or you wouldn't be here. So go write your hearts out. Go make some bright, jagged, dissonant noise. Thanks to Sean and everybody else on staff for making this week happen. And to my workshop, I haven't taught in 4 years, and it's been really a big-hearted week for me, plugging back into that energy. Really appreciate the talent, generosity, the curiosity of this entire crew of people, but especially a shout out to my workshop. So a few years ago, and maybe this had something to do with my age, maybe it had something to do with the pandemic, maybe it had something to do with just the unrest in the world right now, but my nerves felt a little bit shot, like burnt out filaments in a dead light bulb. And I was kind of numb. I was feeling flatlined in a way, like I'd lost my capacity for awe. And part of this, I eventually determined, was because my brain was overloaded with startling information constantly. Within seconds of something happening in Rio, Tokyo, London, Chicago, wherever, we know all about it. We see video footage of it live. We hear firsthand testimony. We have experts immediately weighing in, and hot take after hot take after hot take. We know everything always. Even Mars is no longer a mystery. And I like the idea of battling back against that in my life and in my work. So I decided to stop living in a constant state of breaking news, and I deleted all social media apps from my phone, started reading almost all news in print, silenced all notifications, and in my work, I dreamed up a project that reveled in mystery and uncertainty. I would create a new world within this world. And if I built something that defied easy explanation, I hope to conjure in myself, hopefully in my audience, awe and wonder, and therein lies the sublime. It begins with a comet. Decades ago, an infrared telescope captured the thermal emissions streaking through the solar system. Eventually, it was determined to be 300.2 kilometers wide and orbiting the sun in an elongated ellipse that would bring it within 500,000 miles of Earth. The moon, by comparison, is 238,900 miles away. This would be, scientists said, a beautiful light show that everyone would enjoy all the more, knowing that we'd narrowly escaped planetary annihilation. The official name of the comet was P/2011 C9, but most people called it Cain, the surname of the astronomer who discovered it. 20 years later, it burned into view and made its close pass by Earth. People took off work. They gathered at soccer fields and in parking lots, on rooftops and along sidewalks, setting up lawn chairs and picnic blankets and grills and coolers as though readying for a fireworks display. Everyone suddenly owned a telescope. Vendors sold comet t-shirts and hats and keychains and plush stuffed toys. Surfers stacked up on beaches waiting for the big waves they believed would come from the gravitational flux. At least 2 cults killed themselves off, announcing this was the end of the world and the comet a gateway to the vault of heaven. Professors and scientists and religious leaders became regular guests on cable news shows where they talked about how comets had long been associated with meteorological and human disasters. Tsunamis, earthquakes, droughts. In 44 BC, when Caesar was assassinated, his soul was said to depart the earth and join the comet flaming overhead. In AD 79, a comet's arrival aligned with the eruption of Vesuvius. In AD 684, when Halley's Comet passed by, the Black Death broke out. And in 1066, when it made another appearance, William the Conqueror won the Battle of Hastings. Celestial judgment and providence, or an instrument of the devil, as Pope Calixtus III called it. Heaven knows what awaits us, one professor said. It is a reminder of our irrelevant smallness and accidental existence in the universe, a glimpse of something violently outside the bounds of human existence, as close as you can get to seeing God. Local news reporters interviewed people on the streets. I don't know, man, it's just kind of cool, one guy said. Special, once in a lifetime sort of deal. You want to be able to say, I was there. It's almost like we're living this 2-dimensional life. Now there's this sense of it being like 3-dimensional. Cain looked like a roughly drawn eye, some said, or a glowing animal track, or a slash mark in the fabric of space, a wandering star. For a few days, the comet made night uncertain, hued with a swampy green light. And by day, the sky appeared twinned with suns. And then, gradually, the comet trailed farther and farther away, and people forgot all about it. Until 1 year passed. The planet finished its orbit of the sun and spun into the debris field left behind by the comet, the residue of Cain's passage. This June, the sky would fall. That's what the newscaster said. The meteor shower was not as long-lasting as August Perseids, but for several nights, the sky flared and streaked and wheeled, the constellations seeming to rearrange themselves with ever-shifting tracks of light, at first hundreds, and then thousands, and then hundreds of thousands, and finally, an uncountable storm of meteors. The ground shook, windows shattered, grids of electricity went dark, satellites shredded, radio signals scrambled, dogs howled, and people screamed their prayers. Many of the meteors dissolved in the atmosphere, but many struck the earth, sizzling into the ocean, splintering roofs, searing through ice, punching craters into fields and forests, and mountainsides like the seeds of the night. It was then that everything changed. That's the prologue to not just this book, but all of the books in the comet cycle. So a little bit of the mercenary side of things, along with the artistic. I knew I wanted to write a series, but I also knew that every series results in attrition, that every series loses readers as it moves on. And so I was looking to models like those of Loris Lowry, who has in The Giver, the messenger gathering blue. She has what could be called a family or a bestiary of books. And I was looking too to the Marvel and DC universe. Right? I grew up on comics, as I was talking about earlier this week. And one of the things that I loved about comics is that they were part of that rich fabric of continuity. They were all telling individual stories and one larger story at the same time, so that what happened in Wonder Woman carried over to Batman, carried over to Superman. They were speaking to each other. So I wanted to do that. I wanted these books to speak to each other. And in doing so, I wanted these books to come out in very close proximity And I wanted them to all be happening simultaneously in different parts of the world where different things had sort of been introduced as a result of these meteor storms, right? So new elements are introduced to the world. And as a result of this, the geopolitical theater is thrown into chaos. The weapons sector and energy sector are shaken up. And we have, as cheesy as this might sound, a new dawn of heroes and villains. All right, so in this particular book, we're in northern Minnesota. And what happens here is metal falls from the sky. A new metal known as omnimetal that you could compare to a kind of vibranium, right? In that it absorbs energy on a quantum level. So you can imagine that people from all around the world are suddenly going to become very interested in northern Minnesota, right? Buying up tracts of land, setting up mining operations so that this place becomes a kind of Deadwood 2.0. The middle of nowhere over, at the top of the arrowhead becomes the center of everything. Here's some more mayhem for you. I was talking to my class earlier today about set piece moments. And when you hear the word set piece, you might think the pieces of a set. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what Hitchcock calls crescendos. These moments of heightened physicality, where you typically have, an operatic scene of violence. If it's a thriller like The Untouchables, we watched a scene from that today, and the stairway shootout. Or if it's a Western, it might be a set piece moment, might be a high noon shootout, or it's a moment that, probably is going to appear in the trailer. It's a moment that you're no doubt going to gaspingly recall to your friends over beers at the bar afterwards. It's the moment that in the film you will remember even 20 years later instantly when somebody brings up the title, right? Producers are looking for 5 to 7 of these set pieces to appear in every movie. And I'm oftentimes applying these sort of mathematical theorems, what I call story math, and looking at, this happens in a movie on page 15 or on page 25, or okay, if a screenplay is 110 pages or 90 pages, apply that same, I know we're all terrible at math or we wouldn't be here, apply that same sort of thing to a 10-page short story, or apply that same sort of thing to a 250-page novel. And you can create sort of like an algorithmic cousin. At some point, you read a bedtime story to your child for the last time. At some point, you run through a sprinkler or hit a home run or stand on your head for the last time. At some point, you go from hating to tolerating to loving to requiring coffee. At some point, you go from grieving a lost parent to remembering them fondly. Most transitions are gentle and unrecognized and individual. This one was violent and collective. Everyone could point to the same date on the calendar and say, then that was when everything changed. In northern Minnesota, the nightbirds went silent. Worms and salamanders twisted out of the dirt. Dogs whimpered under beds. Some people suffered from sudden migraines, and others noticed the fillings tanging their mouths with the taste of metal, and others shook their cell phones and said, hello? And then the sky fell. The meteors, some the size of golf balls, hailed down one after the other. Some were as big as zeppelins and knuckled up huge mounds of earth, spiked with woods. Trees splintered and caught fire as though struck by cannonballs. Silos opened up and spilled their grain in a hissing rush. Lakes splashed and chimneyed with steam. Houses vanished. A woman named Jessica Peterson was driving a semi north along Highway 1, hauling a tank full of milk. She leaned over the steering wheel, craning her neck to take in the sky. The radio fuzzed in and out, country music, Bible-thumping preachers, news reports, a chaotic babble. She spun the dial until it settled on classic rock. The station was running a themed show, a comet countdown. David Bowie, Starman, gave way to Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven. A hula girl was anchored to the dash. The paint on her belly was worn away because Jessica liked to rub it for luck. And she rubbed it now. But it was too late for luck. She didn't see the meteor itself, only the crown of the fire-edged asphalt rising before her. A crater had opened in the road and she couldn't brake fast enough. The semi chunked over the lip of rubble and descended into the sudden pit. The grill struck the far side of it and the semi accordioned with the doom and shriek of rent metal. The tires melted and the milk glugged out of the fissured tank and formed a scalding pond that boiled and steamed. A man named Paul Weitz was washing dishes after dinner while his daughters watched television in the living room. They kept complaining about the quality of the picture, and he kept telling them, if it's so horrible, shut it off and get your butts to bed. He added more soap to suds up the water and scraped some dried yolk off a plate with his fingernail, and then noticed that the half and quarter full glasses on the counter beside him were trembling. Water shivered inside them. Their rims chimed against each other. He looked out the window in time to see the shining paths of a dozen or more meteors. He charged into the living room and scooped up his daughters with his soap-splattered hands just as the house began to shake. Holes opened in the ceiling and the floor. Cinders splintered the air. He dodged through columns of short-lived light, and when he glanced up, he could see rough patches of sky. His daughters were screaming when he laid them in the bathtub and covered their body with his and said, "It's going to be okay. Daddy will keep you safe." Ken Pierce was out on Miners Lake in his V-Sport cruiser. He had a six-pack of hams on ice in the cooler and a pole baited with a leech in the water. Fish probably wouldn't be biting this time of night, but what the hell, here he was, waiting on the meteor shower to get going, so he might as well try his luck. When the sky began to streak and strobe, so did the reflective surface of the water, so he felt he was floating inside a globe of shaking stars. The air trembled with the thunder of sonic booms and cratered moorings, so Ken didn't hear the water splashing and plopping all around him as fish leaped crazed by what was happening. He spilled his beer when a walleye flopped into his lap, one sunfish and then another smacked the deck. A trout arced over the railing and rattled directly into the ice-filled cooler. And on 400-acre lot 30 miles outside of North Fall, a quick succession of impacts pounded the earth. Not much remained of the Gundersons' maple forest, but scorched stumps and burning leaves. The displaced dirt had nudged the foundation of the house up on one side so that it sat crookedly, but it was otherwise spared. Its windows had shattered, some of the vinyl siding had melted, bricks still fell from the chimney, water gurgled from a broken pipe. One meteor hit close to the house and produced a splash of molten metal like a muddy wave of lava. And the little boy, named Haken, was slammed by the final burning reach of it. He barely had time to throw up his arm before it struck him. His scream was silenced before it ever left his mouth. He went rolling across the lawn, cowled in red-hot metal. The lawn scorched and smoked beneath him. His clothes and hair were incinerated. He lay there for several minutes, his body tremoring, and the metal cooled to a silver sheen that slowly shrank to patches, like puddles drying in the sun, before being absorbed into his skin entirely. He went still, and then rose with a sucking gasp, deep and hungry. He looked around at a landscape that was unrecognizable, all smoke and fire and what looked like some hellish lake, a massive silver reach veined through with red. He ran then into the night. He had forgotten about his parents. He had forgotten his name. For the moment, he was nothing but fried nerve endings, and he had no plan except to escape the pain that seemed centered in this place. He would later be discovered wandering naked down the middle of the highway with a blank look on his face. When asked what happened, he could only say, "The sky fell on me." So there's some man. So people ask me, why northern Minnesota? I've lived here for 10 years now, and it feels like it took that long, and I've lived in the Midwest longer than that, but I'm from out west originally, and for a long time my stories were centered there. But after living in Minnesota for over 10 years, after living in the Midwest for even longer than that, I felt like I finally had the knowledge to sort of do what Kimberly was talking about and activate, the geography, to make it come alive. I'm not just talking about the geography, of course, I'm talking about the history, I'm talking about the politics, I'm talking about the culture, the myths, and the vernacular of the place. I wanted to make that a character in my story. And I was especially interested in the way that in northern Minnesota, right, what is Minnesota? What's Canada? What is private? What is native? What is owned by the mines? What is claimed by the environmentalists? There's a lot of wars going on over what belongs to whom and how the land should be used. And I thought that would be especially interesting to treat an area you could refer to as liminal, as a borderland, as a place where I expanded that notion into the cosmic as well. So that's where this first book takes place. But the second, The Unfamiliar Garden, takes place in Seattle. And it has not to do with metal, it has to do with fungus. Some people think that the largest organism in the world is the blue whale, but it's a fungus located in the Pacific Northwest. And it's 8,000 years old and 3,000 square miles wide, and just ever expanding. This mat beneath the surface, and it secretes these digestive enzymes that kill conifers. And these cute little yellow buttons pop up here and there on the forest floor. And I have stood over this in Joseph, Oregon. I've stood over this thing, and I looked around, and this is years and years and years ago. So sometimes this stuff, right, you're always paying attention so that whatever might be swimming by has a chance to swim in. But sometimes it takes years and years and years before you find a place to put it in a story. But in that moment, I was thinking about this monster that was essentially beneath me, this massive monster. And I envisioned people in the place of those trees. Now, sometimes people ask me, because I don't just write scary books, but I do write a lot of scary stuff. And they're like, what scares you? What scares you? And I have my joking response, which is like clowns, sharks, dentists. And that's true, I am afraid of those. But the thing that I'm really scared of, I'm guessing a lot of you can relate to this, something happening to my kids. That's the ultimate fear. And, I had I'm sure you've talked during the week about channeling experience, right? And when you can channel those raw emotions onto the page, something that you have experienced yourself, right? Even if you're handling it in a slanted sort of way, that electricity, that dark electricity carries through. When my kids were young, they had issues with breathing, their throats were too tiny, and every winter they ended up with a croup that would literally, they could not breathe. And one of my worst memories, because we were in and out of the ICU constantly, was my son. His face was turning blue. The ambulance showed up. It was a blizzard in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I was outside watching him being put into the ambulance, and then I had to follow. And I had no idea, whether when we arrived at the hospital, my son was still going to be alive. Absolutely my worst memory. And I'm channeling that into this book because, another thing that we have been talking about is in my class, how stories are about the thing and the other thing, right? So this story on the one hand is about alien fungus, but it's also about a broken family. Because in the beginning of this story, a child vanishes on the night that the sky falls. And she's with her father that night. They're out mushroom hunting in the Olympics. Fast forward 5 years, and he is a professor of biology at UW, She, the wife, is a detective with the Seattle PD. He is investigating new growth. A drought has come, a drought has ended, new growth, new fungal growth is witnessed. He's investigating this at the same time that his wife is investigating a series of ritualistic murders. And these two elements end up bringing them together professionally and emotionally once again. And what I wanted to do was create the possibility of the thematics of the fungus. I wanted to create a symbiosis in the point of view so that it begins with a he, she, he, she, he, she. And then towards the end, when it turns out that maybe the child is still alive after all, it moves into a collective point of view and becomes a they. I'm going to read briefly from this, and then I'm going to shut it down, and you can throw questions and rotten tomatoes my way. In the Olympic National Forest, the air appears thick with ghosts. A creamy fog drifts along and the evergreens knife through it. The old shaggy trees give way in clear-cut patches to the young, noble, and Douglas firs of the Hemlock Hills Tree Farm. It's here that dozens of men and women gather wearing hazmat suits. The moisture in the air carries sound strangely, making things seem both up and down, far away and nearby. So the shuffling of fabric could be the wing beats of birds, and the tromping of boots could be the drum beat of an elk herd on the move. The road is blocked, and they have established a perimeter. Guards are stationed along it in case any hunters or hikers or foragers should wander by. The scientists among them construct temporary greenhouse labs with airlocks. They collect samples, they consult their tablets, they send up drones, they fire up generators, unspool cords, arrange stadium lights, and snap photos that light up the fog in quick bursts like a thunderhead. The FAA reported the formation to them. A Delta pilot en route from Seoul to Seattle was readying for her descent when she spotted something bulging out of the clouds. She described it as an upright UFO. Instead of a saucer or cigar on its side, it was a vertical formation. It would have sounded crazy except for the shaky cell phone video that accompanied it. The clouds were thick and the shape phased in and out of view, seemingly stationary, but never entirely visible. She estimated its height as somewhere between 500 and 1,000 feet. It was already weird, but then it got weirder, she said. When it came out of the clouds for the last time, I swear, I was looking at a face. The DOD met her and her co-pilot at the airport, confiscated her cell phone before she could share the video with anyone else, then escorted them to a room below the concourse where they were interviewed and frightened into signing NDAs. All flights were diverted away from the area and a containment squad immediately set off for the Olympic Peninsula. The owner of Hemlock Hills did not live on site, but visited twice weekly for trimming and pest control. That's a nice thing about Christmas tree farming as opposed to dairy farming. You can leave the trees be. Peats don't get swollen. His name was Red, and he was 72 years old and favored camo and denim. He sported a gray beard stained yellow from always smoking. It had finally started raining again in earnest about a week ago, and he decided to tromp around the acreage and see how the trees were holding up. He found the ground bulging and cracked in places, and from these points of inflammation grew fleshy white stalks, some of them as big as him. No, I don't own a goddamn cell phone, never goddamn will, he said. I know he hadn't taken a photo, but he had called in the problem to both the UW extension and his insurance company because this could obviously affect his bottom line. I was supposed to be retired, you understand? It's supposed to be easy money, tree farming. But between the damn drought, now this damn fungus is turning out to be a genuine pain in my asshole. He was offered a check then, one that was the equal of all future profits. He was happy to give up the land to them for what he called his Hawaii money. Since the last time Red visited the land, those young stocks have grown swiftly and exponentially. They form a ring approximately 100 yards in diameter, and though the team has yet to excavate and study what lies below, the radial height of each stalk appears to be 600 feet. Their conical caps are porous and ridged, and though it is difficult to see from the ground. Drone footage indeed reveals something resembling a face image, like some version of the Easter Island monolith. The scientists speak of glucose, yeast nitrogen base, incubation, optimal growth, rhizis spores, germination, hyphae, elongation rates, and possible growth curves for the filamentous fungi. But there is one person here who has an answer that reaches beyond data. And he is also the only one present who doesn't wear a hazmat suit. Isaac positions himself at the center of the formation, with Director Ricketts standing attentively beside him. He breathes in the chill, loamy air, while she breathes through a hissing filter. "Ready?" she says. He nods, and she unclips a walkie-talkie from her belt and says, "Clear the circle." The command is repeated dozens of times all around them as everyone marches away and escapes their range of view. And he and Director Ricketts are left with only the Christmas trees and the swirling porridge of fog. "Better?" she says, and he says, "Much." He unlaces his shoes, peels off his socks, tidily places them aside. Then he digs his pale pink feet into the black dirt of the forest floor and closes his eyes and takes a deep breath. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have for me about the craft or business. All right. Okay, true.
Hello. So one of the many great things about the Ninth Mental is that you're working with a whole ensemble cast of characters, a family of characters. And I found that you found a way of letting each character basically have a moment. Like even minor characters got to have a moment. I wondered, is that something during the process that happened naturally? Of maybe a minor character rose up and did something in the plot that excited you, surprised you in the moment, or was that something during revision where you were like, oh, what if that happened? So I was wondering about that. Thank you.
Great question. Yeah. So we were talking about in class how I typically design stories. I have just off of my office a closet, and the previous owner of the home was a hobby photographer, and this was his dark room. And so it's appropriate that this dark room is where I tack up all of my ideas. So every morning I go in there with my coffee steaming in my hand, and beneath the red light, I look at all of these articles tacked up on the walls and clusters and character ideas. And I was talking to the class today about how I have a list of scares, set piece ideas, but I also have these big scrolls of paper. And I tear them off of my kids, Melissa and Doug Hardy's. Sounds a little less sinister when I put it that way. Put those up on the wall. And on the left, on the top of this scroll, I have the general story. This is Red Moon. It's about werewolves living among us, 3% of the population. There's a lot more resemblance to the X-Men than Twilight. These aren't werewolves who kick up their heels and transform. There's no sparkly vampires. It's like xenophobia. That's what the story's about. Anyways, the fear of the other. Anyways, so there's the headline idea. On the left-hand side, what I do is I have characters. When I say I have characters, I have Wikipedia entries, essentially. Sometimes I even cartoon what they look like. Then, once I figure out who they are, I figure out what they want. Once I figure out what they want, I can put, like a cruel god, obstacles in the way of their desire. And so across this scroll of paper, I start to have these threads, or these moments, these images about what's going to happen to these characters. So It's a big, messy piece of paper. One of the things I do after that is I go through this piece of paper and I figure out in a musical sort of way, what's an uptick? What's a downtick? What's an uptick? What's a downtick? And by that, I mean, is this a moment of emotional repose that's rather quiet? Is this one of those crescendo moments? And what I do then is I put another scroll of paper beneath that one and I start to break all this stuff into chapters. And what I want is for these chapters to have a jagged sort of appearance that when you step back from it all, it looks like a seismograph, a cardiogram, what I call a suspensometer. Right? Because you want that thing to be looking like Colorado, not Iowa, right? and so for each of these characters, to circle back to True's question, right? I'm trying to figure out moments like what do they want? So what incites their journey? When do they make a critical decision connected to what incites their journey? Is there a moment of reversal where whatever they were hunting for, their plan is not working out, and so they have to shift their plan in another direction? What is a big climactic moment for them? Are they going to fail? Are they going to have an ambiguous ending? Are they going to have a happy ending? All of these things I'm thinking about in advance. I'm sometimes thinking about these books for years before I actually begin writing them. Okay, and I do this because, well, I wrote 4 failed novels. Every writer you ever meet will tell you this. We all have those failed novels in the drawer. And you know what happened? I had to teach a novel writing class. And I was like, oh, shit. I have to stand up in front of people and pretend to be an expert on something that I'm continuously failing at. And so what I did was I got serious. Now, one of the exercises that I gave my course is this. When I was in grad school, I felt like I was having some trouble with structure. So I looked at a writer, a short story writer, who I thought had tight structure, mathematics, Flannery O'Connor. And what I did was I looked at a story, Everything That Rises Must Converge, and I reread it 7 times. I reread it 7 times because I was emotionally disengaged from the narrative and could look at its component parts, look under the hood, understand it technically. Rereading. I then, as an exercise, created a beat sheet based upon what I understood how the story was functioning. Meaning, paragraph 1, character A, introduced via dialogue, is jealous and spiteful, which is every Flannery O'Connor character. Paragraph 2, theme introduced via description of setting, and so on. Then I tried to write a story that replicated that skeleton, but bore no resemblance to the original story. Okay, I did that like 2 or 3 times and it just clicked. I got it. I was using different forms, different types of short stories. You know, how does Alice Munro do this versus Flannery O'Connor? Elliptical style instead, and so on. So then in grad school, when I taught grad school, I started assigning that to my students in our graduate forms class. They would choose a story. They would read it 6 or 7 times. They would emotionally disengage with it. They would create a blueprint. They would then write a story connected to that cousined up to that original piece. And then I made them stand up in front of the whole class, and for an hour, they would walk us through every single move they made in that story. And they all said it was the most helpful exercise. It's the most helpful exercise I'd ever done. It's the most helpful exercise they had ever done. So I started doing that with my novels. I don't know why, I'm a slow learner. Why it didn't occur to me I needed to do the same thing. It didn't occur to me to do that until I had to teach a novel writing class. And I went, oh shit. So I took all these novels I admired, and I read them, and I read them, and I read them 5 times. I knew them in and out. And I created blueprints. And I taught different styles of novels to the students, and in articulating it to them, I figured things out on my own. I had a contract with Grey Wolf for my first novel by the end of that semester. So I've always done that. I've always had those scrolls up in my office because to me, they are like Dumbo's magic feather. Dumbo doesn't actually need the magic feather to fly, right? Makes him feel a lot better though when he's got it gripped in his trunk. You know, when you work on something for years and it turns to dust in your hands, that can break you. I did that 4 times, don't want to do it again. So my office wall, this dark room wall, right? Looks like a conspiracy theorist wall or a serial killer's wall. You can think of it as just being like packed with Dumbo's feathers. Right? And to circle all the way back to what you were saying, every one of those characters is going to have a signature visual moment, a signature set piece moment. Any other questions? Hello.
Hello. Thank you very much. My question is about, because you were just talking about how you basically deconstructed a novel you liked about plot. Have you done that with like genre fiction or like other tropes in just like fiction or other forms and whatnot in just writing?
Yeah. So a few years ago, more than a few years ago, I'm getting to that age where it's like, that was actually a long time ago. When I say a few years ago. So a few years ago, a book called Girl with the Dragon Tattoo came out. Right? Now I wanted to write a book that was a thriller, but a big thriller, like a big brick of a thriller. And I had figured out how to write a short novel, a short thriller novel, but this book, you know, like people were seeking out chiropractic care, you know, because they were carrying this thing around. And I remember getting on a plane and just seeing this is when people weren't reading devices, you know, and every single seat had that highlighter yellow cover. And then I walked down the concourse and everybody right there was reading it. So I was like, all right, I got in, I read it once, I read it twice, I read it 3 times. And one thing that I did was pulled out sticky notes. So the sticky notes were pink, they were green, they were cornflower blue. I had all the sticky notes color-coded, right? And one thing that I did was figured out how every single character had their thing. Multiple things, I should say. So Elizabeth Salander, she had a legal thing going on. Elizabeth Salander, you know, she had, because of her situation, somebody who was a guardian, even though she's an adult, and she has to get everything signed off on, even her bank account. So she's got that legal thing. And then she's got some other stuff going on with, you know, catching a serial killer. And then she's got some other stuff going on when it comes to her traumatized history. Then you've got Mikkel Blomkvist, who's the main character of the book, along with Elizabeth Salander. And he's got professional stuff going on because he's about to get canned from his job running this magazine. He's got legal issues. He might go to prison. He's got familial issues. His wife has divorced him and his daughter thinks he's a loser. And he's got serial killer issues. Each of these things gets a different color sticky note. So what I started to do is like, one of these things comes up, sticky note. One of the things comes up, sticky note. So that the book appeared peacocked with feathers by the end, right? And I started to recognize that there was a dance going on, a rotation. And this goes along with that story math idea. There was a rotation where it would be like on page 35, this comes up, it comes up again, page 80, it comes up again on page 120, it comes up again on page 170. And I started to refer to this as the dance of the flaming chainsaws. Because each of these things is like, you know, they're dangerous. And so one comes spinning into view and then the author deals with it and woo, tosses it up. You know, usually deal with it in some way that then complicates it further or twists it in a new direction. And then before you can be like, but what about that thing? It's like, oh, you know, here comes the next thing. So this larger orchestration going on created this thrilling, suspenseful plot. And then you look at other books and you start to see the same thing. Or you look at other TV shows and you start to see the same thing. You look at, right, Island of Dr. Moreau. How does Island of Dr. Moreau open up? A bunch of dudes on a boat. End of chapter. There's a storm. Next chapter. The boat is sank. There's like 3 dudes in a rowboat. They start to fight and they fall, 2 of them fall over the edge. End of chapter. Shark infested waters. Next chapter, single dude in the boat, sunburned, delirious, you know. On the horizon, is it a mirage or is it an actual vessel coming towards him? End of chapter. Next chapter, dude wakes up in the belly of a ship, crawls to the deck, looks around. Thank you for saving me, he says. And some of the cast turns around, you know, the people on board turn around and they're not humans, they're mutants. They're human animal hybrids. End of chapter. Right. So in other words, you build towards, I was doing this thing when I was writing my chapters. Early on, those failed novels, I was doing a lot of things wrong, but one of the things I was doing wrong is I was treating my chapters like short stories. Now, introduce trouble and resolve trouble. Introduce trouble, resolve trouble in every chapter. And so it was like start, stop, start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. Instead of moving towards a moment of emotional or physical peril and then cutting away. And Law and Order has already taught me this. I don't know why I wasn't clued into it, right? Every Law and Order episode, you've got like, you know, the detectives are in the alley and they hear a noise and they swing the flashlights toward it. Oh, it's just a rat. But then, right, the flashlight tracks along a shoe and a leg and it goes up the torso and lands on the face of a body. But it's not just a body, it's the body of the star witness in the trial that's coming up. And then, dun dun, Cialis commercial. Right, so figuring out the dun dun within the chapters and that rotation of different high stakes moments for every one of those characters. Any other questions from the crew?
You ever seen a UFO?
I have seen a meteor streak through the sky that was so bright that the entire sky turned green and flared green. It scared the hell out of me when I was a teenager driving in the country. So maybe. Hello.
Hi. I'm curious, you've talked a lot about how you structure your fiction and get your characters, but it seems within these, there's a lot of science that you'd also have to research when you're talking about the comet and the fungus. Because right away I'm thinking, oh my God, mycorrhizae is a deadly fungus, you know? So how much time do you have to invest in that to get to a place to feel confident to talk about it? Because it seemed very convincing, you know, and we know there's a reality out there about the comet potentially striking us.
Yeah,
Like, did you go and study metals to decide on your metal? You know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time researching all of my books and all my short stories. I was telling my class about how, you know, once I had a character who was a mail carrier, and I just waited out by the mailbox. I was like, hey, can I go for a ride with you? And he's like, sure. Rode around with the mailman all day. You know, I was writing a story about a taxidermist, spent 3 days in a taxidermy studio. I was writing about werewolves, as I said before, for Red Moon, but the thing I wanted to do was authenticate it in the best way I could so that there was some sort of scientific reason that was analogous to the myth and, you know, homed in on misfolded proteins, prions. And so I sat down with all these researchers who specialized in animal-borne pathogens, who worked for the USDA labs, who worked for Iowa State University, where I was at the time, and I bought them dinner. And I filled up yellow legal tablets with information. And I relied on them then as readers as well for the book, like, can you check this out and make sure I got it right? Did the same thing with the fungus. Took a class at the Wolf Ridge Environmental Center on fungus. But my mom, you know, she's a plant nerd. You know, fungus is its own thing, but she's a nature nerd. And I, you know, just gleaned a lot from her. She was in the Forest Service. I have a biology professor buddy at Carleton who specializes in fungus. So, you know, bought him dinner, bought him a bottle of whiskey. And yeah, I try, what I'm trying to do is, you know, create something that has a bedrock of truth to it so that you believe in the otherworldly.
Did you find any werewolves to follow?
I needed only to look in the mirror. I've always loved werewolves, my favorite monster. In 6th grade, I wrote a research paper called Werewolves with an exclamation mark. That's how excited I was about it. I still have it. It was only 5 pages long, but it had a table of contents. In the library, I discovered a book that contained a ceremony to turn yourself into the werewolf. So I believe in field research, and it worked. But I remember, I mean, again, I still have it. I got a C on that. So when I published Red Moon, you know, the dedication for a little bit before my editor convinced me to delete it was "In your face, Mrs. Ziegenhagen." Any other questions? Hello. What's coming up?
Well, you fascinated us with the first 2 books. Is the third book built yet?
The third book is built, indeed. It's called Skyfall. It takes place in Alaska, in Fairbanks. So I need to make sure that Sean ends up in the acknowledgements, because that's when I started to first think about that place as a setting for a story. Especially when we're driving by that one weird building up on the hill, and you said it was a you know, meteorological center. And it looked like something out of Stranger Things. You know, it's this brutalist architecture, and you just knew that something weird was happening in there. And there's all this meteorological research that happens in Alaska. So it's called Skyfall. It has to do with what's above, and it also has to do with multidimensionality. Any other questions? So the initial part, you know, the initial intent was to publish these books every 6 weeks to get into the mercenary stuff again. Not every 6 weeks, we went up to that. Every 6 months, in part because I'd learned from the comics trade in a way that publishing is wrong right now. I think they're doing it wrong. Okay, in comics, you get a $2.99 or $3.99 floppy, right? Then after 5 of those come out or 6 of those come out, they're collected into a paperback trade. And then a little bit later on, those are collected into a hardcover with bonus material. And then maybe, if it was a really good run, there's a hardback omnibus edition. Okay? And what this does is it creates hype, cheap word of mouth. And publishing, novel publishing by contrast, they put out a $37 hardback up front. I don't get it. I hesitate to buy hardcovers. So what you're doing is you're launching a book with something that's exclusionary. People won't hesitate to drop $3. People won't hesitate quite as much to drop $10 on a paperback. So I wanted to flip things on the head. I demand, you know, that was part of my proposal. It was like, these books will come out as paperbacks in quick succession. They will then be collected into a hardcover omnibus edition with bonus essays and illustrations. Right? So it's trying to kind of mess with the publishing model and take risks, not just with the material, take risks with the way it was launched as well.
You said when you do your characters, you know, create some sketching and visual stuff. Will you do your illustrations?
I'm not that good.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, I have taken drawing classes. I'm okay, but I'm not that good. No. Yeah, when I'm paired up with all these amazing artists, and I'm now doing not just comics with them, but I'm doing illustrated novellas that I've been releasing every few months that have like 13 illustrations in them. Hello there.
Hi, I saw you in Iowa in 2017, I think.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Where was it?
Iowa State.
Okay.
Yeah, it was great. So it was nice seeing you again.
Good to see you
For that
again.
reading. I have a question. I don't know how to formulate, of course, obviously. Can you speak more about like the business of writing and publishing, and what are a couple of things that you've learned that are like as an early author that maybe you would change or speak to now as someone who's published multiple books in that space, and have negotiated things like, hey, this is how I want this to come out, etc.
Sure. The first thing I say is that everything in my career has been incremental. Right? Start off with short stories. I moved into articles for magazines. I started publishing novels. I started writing podcasts and doing comics. Now I'm doing TV and film, right? It's all been incremental. And I've sort of earned my way into the side doors of some of these industries as a result. Like, you can't just go to Marvel and DC with no track record. And at first they rejected me over and over and over again. But because I had established myself as a novelist, they gave me a shot, right? They also hire TV writers because they've established themselves elsewhere. So, I've moved, everything's been incremental, everything's been patient. Beyond that, everything has been defined by failure. All of my successes are defined by failure, came out of failure. For instance, I go to college. I'm on academic probation. I sit down with my advisor, who's one of the professors who failed me that first semester. Took a computer science class, didn't know how to code, thought I'd figure it out, didn't. Bad at math. And he said, and I made passing reference to this before, but he said, it's kind of weird that you are doing so horribly. Because your application essay was the best I've ever read. Right. Now, that's the good thing that he said. Prior to that, he said, college just isn't for everybody. He said that other thing as I was leaving his office with my throat jammed up with poison. All right, so I had an existential crisis. I left college. I went and worked at Glacier National Park. It's a weird thing to be, but I was a gardener at Glacier National Park. And while I was a gardener at Glacier National Park, I took a fancy to a waitress there. And I was keeping a journal for the first time, and I was also writing poems first time, because that had stuck in my head, that whole, that application essay was the best I'd ever read. I'd always done well in English, but I grew up around ranchers, I could be a writer. It never even occurred to me. That was something otherworldly, like becoming an astronaut. So I went into college with one idea. I thought maybe college wasn't for me, but then I started to write, and I started to write, and I started to write, and I started to write for someone. I started to write for her. And then one night we were watching the sunset over the Rockies, and she said, I think you should be a writer. And I said, okay. And reader, I married her. Well, the failures just kept piling up. I talked about those 4 failed novels, but out of the wreckage of those 4 failed novels I was referring to in my lecture the other day, there was an award-winning short story. I had one short story that I submitted to 39 places, 39. Rejected, 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 rejected. It was big. So I believed in it, but it was big, and I knew the bigness was hurting it. It's like a 34-pager. Finally got in to a place that was better than a lot of the others. It ended up in Best America, right? So failure, failure, failure. How many people keep going like that, right? The perseverance, there's a lot of talent out there. You have to be bullheaded, though. You have to be able to hear that no over and over and over again, develop that callus around your heart, size of a catcher's mitt. I look at what happened with that screenplay I wrote. It was called Terminal, and it was about, kind of a Die Hard 2 thing. Thriller in an airport. Rejected all around Hollywood. But here I am submitting and submitting and submitting and submitting to DC Comics. I'm rejected from 2009 to 2014. Submitted 47 pitches to DC Comics. And finally, I think I just exhausted them. We give up. You win. They're like, we have a 2-issue opening for Batman for Detective Comics. Do you have anything? I was like, well, as a matter of fact, didn't tell them it was a failed screenplay. Plucked the character out, put Bruce Wayne in, kicked off my comics career. I had my first comics pitch. I was really excited about comics. I submitted to DC Comics, to Vertigo, the series called Red Moon. It's going to be a 30-issue series, original series, published by Vertigo, the HBO of comics. Yes. And you know what they said? They said, you've never published a comic. We're not going to give you the 30-issue original series. But my agent was like, this is a pretty cool idea. I think you should write this as a novel. So I wrote it as a novel, and it became my breakout novel, became the thing that ultimately allowed me to write full time. And I had published a novel before that, but it was a literary novel. And this was like werewolves, you know. People get a little more excited about sometimes. And I was using the same tricks. I just, you know, amplified the monstrification of it all. So yeah, over and over and over again. And what I came to recognize is like, because this just keeps happening. It keeps happening right now. Is that I'm able to recognize the turn. Right, so to all of you writers out there, as you move forward, this business is defined by rejection. And when you arrive at that moment of wreckage, what you need to recognize is that there is a turn available to you that can lead to that later success. So find meaning in the wreckage. Find your compass in the wreckage.